Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I'm here with my spoiler-free, mostly, review of Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I finally read it. I know, I can't believe it. This was actually a buddy read with my friend Katie from A Sea of Tomes. I will link her channel down below as well. I really enjoyed buddy reading this with her and kind of bouncing thoughts off each other. So I have been hearing about this book for pretty much as long as I knew BookTube was a thing, I think. And I have a lot of kind of conflicting feelings about this. You guys will probably remember that I did not enjoy the Grisha trilogy by Leigh Bardugo, but I heard really amazing things about this duology, and basically the consensus seemed to be that even if you didn't like the Grisha trilogy, it's like people still really loved this book and the sequel, Crooked Kingdom. So I was like, okay, well, it's worth a shot. Let's just get started. As I said, this is going to be mostly spoiler-free, and then when I get into spoilers at the very end, I will let you know. So if you haven't read it, you probably have read it. I feel like I'm the last person on planet Earth to read this book, but if you haven't read it, then you won't get spoiled. I'm gonna put this down. This book is heavy. Okay, so I'm gonna start out by talking about the characters, and right off the bat, I just have to complain about something, and I know that people have been talking about this problem since this book came out, so I'm not the first person to call attention to this, but the fact that supposedly all of these kids are in their teens, like, no, that is ridiculous. It honestly feels like she wrote an adult novel and then just did like find and replace in Microsoft Word, and like every time they said their age, they changed it from like 24 to like 16 or something. And I don't normally pick up on stuff like that. Like, I'm not super picky about age ranges, you guys know that. But it was so obvious with this book. It was painfully obvious because like the kinds of things these kids are doing, like I'm not saying that it was impossible for them to be young and to have accomplished these things, because that's not true. But physically, they would not have had time to do all of these things by the time they were like 15 or 16 years old. Like, I think is Kaz supposed to be like 17 or 16 or something like that? Something ridiculous. And he's apparently this like terrifying crime lord. Like, the entire city of Ketterdam like cowers in fear from him. And I'm like, you are a child. You are a child. And like, I know that there are other books, like Artemis Fowl, one of my favorite series. He starts out 12 years old and he's a criminal mastermind. But the whole point of that series is that he's a child genius, and he's like, I don't know, it's kind of hand-wavy. They're like, oh, just trust us, he can do all of these things. Like, I understand that it's not completely justified, but I feel like I can accept it in that series more because we at least have a concrete reason for it. It's like, okay, he genuinely was just born with an incredibly high IQ, so it makes sense that he's like precocious, you know, he's like good enough to come up with these plans and these schemes. And actually, a lot of that series consists of other people not believing that he's capable of these things because he's so young. And like this series, this book did none of that. Like when we get into the later Artemis Fowl books, like watch me eat my words because they don't justify it at all. But like at this point, I feel like I don't buy into it. Like I don't buy any of this. And especially Kaz. They just go so over the top with him and with what he accomplished. And I feel like if they hadn't drawn as much attention to his reputation, it wouldn't have bothered me as much. But like, the book goes out of its way to like beat you over the head with the fact that Kaz is scary and he's like, everyone's afraid of him. And I'm like, he's an adolescent. Like, not to say that those can't be scary, I guess, but it's just, it wasn't done convincingly, in my opinion. And another issue I had with the characters was the like almost lack of development. And like the weird thing about hearing about this series for so long is like, I knew it was a heist story, but I didn't really know what the plot was, which was good. But I had heard so many lines and so many character descriptions. Like, people talk about these characters all the time. So I felt like I had already met all of the characters, and it felt like there were so many times I was reading this book and it's like, I feel like I've done this already. And I think that's just part of the nature of a very hyped series, which is like not the book's fault, not anybody's fault. But something about the character development specifically is like, I don't think a tragic backstory is the same as a well-rounded character. And I feel like that happened a lot in this book, like especially with Inej and to some extent with Kaz. Like, I feel terrible for what happened to Inej. Like, it's heartbreaking, her life and what happened to her and what she's had to overcome. But that doesn't translate to a well-rounded character. Like, I don't feel like I know her at all. Like, she doesn't really have a personality outside of being the Wraith and of having this terrible thing happen to her in her past. And I just feel like that happened kind of over and over with these characters. Like, Inej was one of the biggest examples I noticed, but kind of with Kaz, the same thing happened where it's like if you're reading a book and you're really enjoying it and you find out something terrible about a character's past, it's the difference between reading it and being, oh my god, I can't believe that happened to Inej, and reading it when you're not enjoying the book and you're like, oh, okay, Leigh Bardugo also made Inej a victim of this thing. You know, there's like that very subtle difference between reading it as this character had this happen to them and like the author did this to this character. Like it feels very transparent, I feel like, when you're not enjoying the book, if that makes sense. I didn't completely hate all the characters though. Like I really, really love Nina. I love Nina so, so much. And I've heard that she shows up in like, I think she shows up in King of Scars, and I just adore her. And I really, really loved Wylan as well, and seeing kind of how he was more than he appeared, and he was just such a sweetheart, and all of his interactions with Jesper were hilarious, and that was like one of the highlights of the book for me. So another thing I was kind of prepared for with this book was like how intense people are about the relationships, and like this whole like found family thing, and I didn't feel that. I didn't really feel that at all, and I think partly that's because some of the crew members were not normal members of the Dregs, so it kind of makes sense that they wouldn't already have this bond with each other, but it didn't even feel like they liked each other that much, or like they knew each other, and I know part of that was supposed to happen, but I was just kind of bewildered because this book is touted as being like such a great example of like a found family, and I'm like, where? Like, none of these people like each other. I mean, with a couple of exceptions. And then another thing I really didn't like about the relationships was that the romance felt very underdeveloped. There were a couple of relationships that sort of are alluded to in this book, but I'm mainly talking about what most people would consider like the main romantic relationship. I was really disappointed in it. I don't know if it was because I knew they were gonna be interested in each other, so it wasn't as exciting seeing them get there, but it honestly felt like it came out of nowhere. Like, I have no idea why these people liked each other at all. Like, I don't even feel like they knew each other that well. It was like they fell in love out of like sheer proximity. I don't know, it just felt very underwhelming for me. And then moving into some of the plot stuff, I was not a big fan of the plot overall. And another thing I like didn't like about this book, and just like nobody had warned me about how much body horror there was. Like, there's a lot of gore in this book that's like very detailed, and I was not prepared for any of that. I don't think I've ever heard someone mention that. So that really like lessened my experience, and that's more of like a personal preference thing. Like, I just personally don't enjoy that in books. I think it's lazy and unpleasant, but I know like other people might disagree. But then some things that I think are like less personal preference. This book felt very predictable to me. And like I said, I hadn't been really spoiled for the actual heist part, like the plot going into this book. And it just felt very underwhelming. And this is one of those things where if I'm enjoying a book, I don't really care if I see where it's going. Like, I kind of end up predicting book plot twists or like developments a lot. So I know that like I can love a book and still kind of see where it's going at the end. But this book, like, it was hard because when it doesn't really have anything else that's pulling you in, if the plot is predictable on top of that, it really just makes it not fun. Especially because it's sort of built up as like the whole point of this book is you don't know how they're gonna pull off this heist. And it's like, well, I kind of did. I also feel like it was super boring considering it was a heist novel. Like, I kept putting this book down. Like, me and Katie had kind of decided on like reading about 50 pages a day. And like, there were whole days where I just like didn't pick this book up, and they were like in the middle of the dangerous part of the heist, and I'm like, I don't really care. Like, I don't care enough to pick this book up again. And I think I actually had forgotten I was reading it at a couple of points, which is not a great sign. And then as far as the writing goes, I did really enjoy that overall. I think it was leaps and bounds above the Shadow and Bone trilogy. I thought it was so, so much better. I feel like Leigh Bardugo really like hit her stride more with like how much description and like specifically the style that she was going to use to write in. I really enjoyed that for the most part. And another thing that I really loved was how much humor there was in this book. Like, this was genuinely really funny. Like, there were multiple parts where I think I actually laughed out loud, which very rarely happens for me with books. Like, kind of the banter back and forth was just really, really fun and well done and very clever, and I just really enjoyed that. That was one of my favorite things about the book, actually. The one caveat I will give for the writing is that I still feel like it slipped into like melodrama a few times throughout the book. Like, there's this one part near the very beginning where Kaz is having this like business confrontation almost with another person, and it's like a very normal conversation, and it's like consistent with his voice that we've kind of seen established with his other interactions. And then all of a sudden in the middle of this, he's like, oh no, I think you would shoot me with a song in your black heart. And I'm like, what? Like, it was more dramatic than that. I don't remember the exact line, but it was just like out of the blue, and I'm like, is Kaz a poet now? Like, this really doesn't fit in with what we know of him as a person. And I realize that's like a very nitpicky thing to notice, but like, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about the predictability of the plot, where like, if there aren't a lot of other things I'm enjoying about the book, I start getting very particular about other things that maybe don't matter as much. And then the last thing I want to mention before I get into some of my spoilery thoughts, that's hard to say, is the world building. I thought it was better than Shadow and Bone. It was a lot better than like the pseudo Russia or whatever was supposed to be happening there, but I still didn't like it very much. Like, I don't know, I still don't feel like I have a sense of what this world looks like. Like, I know what I see. I'm like already forgetting the names of places, and I just finished this book a couple days ago. What is it called? It starts with an H? No, Fjerda. Couldn't even remember the name of the main country. Like, I know that it's really cold and there's a lot of ice there. And like, we know about their feelings about Grisha and everything. Like, we know that they're the bad guys, but we don't really know anything about what their country is and how it works. And like, Ketterdam, we kind of get a feeling for, but it's like we don't really know like anything about this like culture, or like what people wear there, or like how they speak. I know a lot of other people really enjoyed the world building in this book, so this is just like a me problem, I guess. I can't even really explain why it felt underdeveloped, but it did feel really underdeveloped to me. It was like very repetitive, like it was very cold. There was a lot of ice, and that was it. And it was disappointing. Okay, now getting into a few of my spoilery thoughts. The ending sucked. I just feel like it was really lazy and really cheap and just like unconvincing. Like, here's the thing, is Kaz is apparently infallible. Like, nothing he does is a mistake. Up until the very end, when Leigh Bardugo needs to get you to come back for the sequel, so suddenly he fucks up in the most dramatic way possible, and he never gets kidnapped. And I just like, I couldn't believe it. That was the one part in the whole book that actually took me by surprise, and it wasn't in a good way. It was like, are you serious? Are we really doing this right now? Like, that's how you're gonna get us to read the next book? Like, really? It just felt so lazy to me. I hated it. I hated it so much. And then another thing, like, throughout the heist, the whole time, I was like, clearly this is what Kaz has been planning all along. Like, never once was there a point where I thought something had actually gone wrong, because it just was so predictable. Like, every single time something bad would happen, I'm like, I bet this is part of his plan. And then you would find out 3 chapters later that this was really what they were supposed to be doing all along. And normally I like stuff like that. I find that really enjoyable, and it's like a really fun way to experience a story. But what irritated me about the way it was used here is that the book kept trying to convince you that things were going wrong, even after like the 4th or 5th time this happened. And I'm like, I'm not gonna believe that he really screwed up. Like, this is clearly gonna be fine. And I guess that's what I had a problem with, was that the book was like genuinely making an effort to scare you, and I'm like, it's not working. I know he's fine. I know they're all fine. Until the very end, when Leigh Bardugo needed him to screw up. So he did. Like, doesn't matter what the rest of his character was doing the whole rest of the book. And this kind of goes along with that. Like, the entire time I was reading this book, I just felt like the thing that I kept thinking was like, oh, well, that's convenient. And that's not a great sign, because like, I'm not really somebody who cares about that in general. Like, if I'm reading a book and liking it, I don't really care if something is convenient. Like, that really doesn't bother me as much as it does a lot of other people. So for it to bother me here, you know it had to happen a lot, and it did. Like, Jesper turning out to be a fabricator, I was like, oh, well, that's handy. Like, wouldn't have wanted you to actually have to figure out a plan instead of just pulling this ace out of your sleeve. And again, that's not something that bothers me, especially if you're reading like a book that's about a heist and like this really interesting plan. Yeah, like throw in some convenient reasons things happen. I don't care. But with this one, it really bothered me because this was set up as like such a brilliant heist novel, and it's like Kaz is this talented mastermind, and I'm like, he's really not. So, you guys can probably tell based on my thoughts that I was pretty disappointed in this book. I did give it 3 stars though, so like I enjoyed it more than any of the Grisha trilogy books, but yeah, and like there were things I liked about it, which is why I gave it 3 stars instead of like 2 or 1. I just feel like when a book is such a fan favorite, it's really hard not to have certain expectations, and I feel like for the most part they were not met. And actually after ranting about it for so long, I'm kind of wondering if it's more of a 2.5 for me than a 3 stars. At this point I don't even want to read Crooked Kingdom. Like, I don't even care about what happens because I'm just so fed up, but I probably will read it at some point. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I'm sorry if you really love this book. I obviously mean no offense to people who enjoy it. I know a lot of people enjoyed it, and I wish I could have too. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!